I'll never forget that night. It was the first time I had ever stayed alone in my family's house. My parents were away for the weekend, and my older brother had gone off to a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving me by myself for the first time. I was excited at first. The thought of having the entire house to myself felt liberating. But that night would change my life forever. I spent the early evening watching movies and snacking. The house is large, and on most days it's filled with the sounds of my parents' voices, the hum of the TV and the laughter of my siblings. But that night it was eerily quiet. I wasn't used to the silence, but it didn't bother me at first. It was just the usual sounds of the house settling. Creaks from the wooden floors, nothing out of the ordinary. It was around midnight when things started to feel off. I had just finished my last snack of the night and was about to head upstairs to bed when I heard something. A soft, almost imperceptible noise coming from downstairs. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe even the house settling like it often does at night. But then I heard it again. This time it was louder, a distinct tap against the wood. I froze. It didn't sound like something falling. It sounded like someone tapping on the door. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, and there was no reason for anyone to be knocking on our door at this hour. My parents always told me to avoid opening the door to strangers when I was alone, so I decided to ignore it. Maybe it was just the house, I thought. But then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a regular ring either. It was slow, deliberate, like whoever was standing outside knew I was inside, knew I was alone. I walked cautiously toward the window by the front door, peering out through the blinds. But there was no one. No car in the driveway, no figure standing by the porch, just darkness. I tried to shake it off, blaming my nerves for getting the better of me. But just as I turned away from the window, I heard a muffled sound followed by the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the walls. It came from the kitchen. I knew I wasn't imagining things. I had heard that sound before when my family had moved in, and we had the pipes fixed. It was the sound of something dragging across the floor. I stood frozen in place. I wanted to call my parents, but the thought of them waking up to my terrified voice in the middle of the night seemed too much. I couldn't sound crazy, so instead, I did what any person would do in my situation. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and held it tightly in my hand. I didn't know what was out there, but I was not going to let it get to me without a fight. I crept down the hallway, the house so quiet. As I neared the kitchen, the scraping noise stopped. Everything went still. For a moment, I thought maybe it had just been an animal outside or a freak occurrence. But then I noticed something. The kitchen light was on. I never turned it on. In fact, I always made sure to turn it off before heading upstairs, and I was certain I had done that tonight. The light illuminated the entire room, and the strange thing was, the floor wasn't just messy. It was covered in mud, as if someone had walked through the kitchen with dirty shoes, leaving a trail of dark footprints behind them. I stepped into the room cautiously, scanning the space for any signs of movement. That's when I saw it. A figure crouched low by the pantry, its back turned toward me. The figure was tall, too tall for any normal person, and its head, it was unnaturally still. I couldn't see much of its face, but what I could see sent a jolt of terror through my veins. The back of its head seemed wrong, like it was too smooth, like the skin was stretched tight over something that shouldn't be there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't take my eyes off it for what felt like an eternity. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. Then, without warning, it turned toward me. Its eyes. I'll never forget its eyes. They weren't human. They were beaten black with no pupils. Just darkness that seemed to suck in all the light around them. I felt as if I was staring into an abyss, a void that was pulling me in. I didn't know how long I stood there, just frozen in fear. But eventually, my instincts took over. I turned and bolted toward the front door, not stopping to check if it was still behind me. The door was locked. Of course, it was locked. I struggled with the handle, trying to open it, but my hands were shaking too badly. That's when I heard it. The slow, deliberate sound of footsteps behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I finally managed to wrench the door open and ran out into the yard, not caring about the cold air biting at my skin. I kept running until I reached the neighbor's house and pounded on their door, crying for help. They let me in, and I told them everything. The police arrived soon after, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no prints, no evidence that anyone had been in the house at all. It was as if the figure had never existed. I couldn't stay there any longer. I stayed with a relative for the next few days while my parents were away. When they returned, I insisted we stay somewhere else. I couldn't bring myself to step foot in that house again, even after they had the entire place checked for any possible explanation. But there's one thing I can't explain after I left that night. My parents found something strange when they went to check the kitchen. The mud on the floor had stopped at the doorway, as if whatever had been in there never actually crossed the threshold. The door was locked from the inside. There's no way to explain it. It wasn't human, and it wasn't just some trick of the mind. I felt its presence in that house in the middle of the night. We left that house soon, and I never go there to check it out again.
Love what you see? Then subscribe us and hit the bell icon to keep up to date, and make sure you like the video. If you have a real horror story that you want to share, please email it to us. Our email is as follows: official@gmail.com.